Hi, I'm Natalie Brooks. 6 months ago, my sister Vanessa stole the wedding venue I'd spent a year planning for. She called it fate. I called it theft. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy stealing my backup plan, I was walking through the doors of St. Augustine Cathedral, the one place she'd dreamed about since we were kids, the one venue she swore she'd get married in someday. And I got there first. Not out of spite, though that was a nice bonus. I did it because I finally understood something. People who take from you don't stop until you stop giving them access. And access, well, that's something I'm done handing out for free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The air in my parents' dining room always smelled the same. Lavender candles mixed with the faint bitterness of overbrewed coffee and something sharper, something I could never quite name. Maybe it was tension. Maybe it was just the scent of a family that had learned to smile through clenched teeth. I sat at the far end of the table, my fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Marcus sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my knee under the table, a quiet anchor in a room that felt like it was slowly filling with water. Vanessa was holding court at the other end, her laughter bright and sharp like the edge of a knife. She had that glow about her, the kind people always commented on. Radiant, they called it. I used to think it was confidence. Now I knew it was just the shine of someone who'd never been told no. She was showing Mom her phone, swiping through photos of floral arrangements and cake designs, her voice animated in that way that demanded everyone's attention. Mom leaned in close, her eyes soft with the kind of affection I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She touched Vanessa's hand, squeezed it gently, and said something I couldn't hear. But I saw the smile. The pride. The unmistakable warmth of a mother who believed her daughter hung the moon. Dad nodded along from his seat, occasionally chiming in with a chuckle or a word of approval. It was a scene I'd witnessed 1,000 times, just with different scripts. Dance recitals. Report cards. College acceptance letters. Vanessa always front and center. Me somewhere in the margins, applauding dutifully. I cleared my throat, setting my mug down with a soft clink that no one seemed to notice. Marcus glanced at me, his eyes asking a silent question. I gave him a small nod. It was now or never. So, I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the chatter. Marcus and I have some news too. The table didn't exactly go silent, but the energy shifted. Vanessa looked up, her smile still in place but her eyes sharpening just slightly. Mom turned toward me with an expression that looked polite but distracted, like I'd interrupted something important. We set a date, I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. June 14th. We booked the Ashwood Estate. It's this beautiful venue out near the lake. Rustic, intimate, exactly what we wanted. Marcus squeezed my knee gently, his support silent but solid. I waited for the response. The congratulations. The excitement. Even just a simple acknowledgement. Instead, Vanessa's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, that's nice, she said, her tone light and airy. June is pretty far out though, isn't it? I mean, a whole year of planning. That's a lot of time for things to, change. I blinked, unsure what to make of that comment. Mom set her coffee cup down and offered me a thin smile. That's wonderful, sweetheart, she said, but her gaze was already drifting back to Vanessa. The Ashwood Estate, you said? I think I've heard of it. Very quaint. Quaint. The word landed like a dismissal. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Marcus's hand tightened around mine under the table. It's more than quaint, I said, forcing a smile. It's where we want to start our life together. We've already put down the deposit. Dad looked up from his plate, finally engaging. A deposit? That's smart. Lock it in early. I nodded, grateful for even that small validation. But before I could say anything else, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a casual elegance that somehow made the gesture look effortless rather than defensive. "Well, Tyler and I are thinking spring," she announced, her voice cutting smoothly through the brief moment of attention I'd managed to capture. "March, maybe. Something intimate but elegant. We haven't picked a venue yet, but we're touring a few places next week." And just like that, the conversation pivoted. Mom's face lit up again, her attention snapping back to Vanessa like a magnet. Dad chimed in with suggestions. The table hummed with energy once more, all of it directed at my sister. I sat there, my announcement already forgotten, feeling like a background extra in someone else's movie. Marcus leaned close to my ear. "You okay?" he whispered. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I meant it. This was how it always went. I'd learned long ago not to expect the spotlight, but some small, stubborn part of me kept hoping. Kept believing that maybe this time would be different. That maybe my wedding, my life, would matter enough to hold their attention for more than 30 seconds. We finished dinner in relative quiet. At least, I was quiet. Vanessa continued to dominate the conversation, spinning grand visions of her perfect wedding, her perfect life. Mom and Dad lapped it up like it was the most fascinating story they'd ever heard. By the time we left, my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning. I threw myself into every detail, determined to create something beautiful despite the lack of enthusiasm from my family. Marcus was my constant. He showed up to every vendor meeting, every cake tasting, every agonizing decision about napkin colors. We spent evenings curled up on my couch, scrolling through Pinterest boards and laughing at the absurdity of choosing between ivory and eggshell. The Ashwood estate became my haven. I visited it twice more after we booked, just to walk the grounds and imagine the day. The old barn had been converted into an elegant event space, with exposed beams and string lights that would twinkle like stars. There was a pond out back where we planned to take photos at sunset. The coordinator, Kevin Tan, was enthusiastic and attentive, treating our wedding like it mattered. Like we mattered. I started a planning binder, one of those thick 3-ring ones with dividers for every category. Flowers. Music. Catering. Guest list. I pressed a sprig of lavender between the pages of the floral section, a sample from the estate's garden. It felt symbolic somehow, like I was preserving a piece of the dream. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, my phone rang. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. I answered, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while I poured coffee. "Hi, is this Natalie Brooks?" "Yes, this is she." "Hi Natalie, this is Jeremy from the Ashwood estate. I'm calling because there's been a situation with your booking, and I wanted to reach out personally." My stomach dropped. The coffee pot hovered in midair, forgotten. "A situation?" I repeated, my voice thin. "Yes, unfortunately, there's been a scheduling conflict. It seems there was an error on our end, a double booking for June 14th. We're so sorry for the confusion, but we're going to have to cancel your reservation." The words didn't make sense at first. I set the coffee pot down carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Wait, what? How is that even possible? We signed a contract. We paid a deposit. I understand your frustration, and will absolutely refund your deposit in full. But the other party booked first, technically, and we didn't catch the overlap in our system until now. Again, we're deeply sorry." Something cold settled in my chest. "Who's the other party?" There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. "I'm not at liberty to share that information, but rest assured, we'll do everything we can to help you find an alternative venue." I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking. Marcus was still asleep in the bedroom, and I stood there in my tiny kitchen, staring at the phone like it had just delivered a death sentence. A double booking. A system error. It was too convenient. Too clean. I opened my laptop and pulled up my email, scrolling frantically through my inbox until I found the confirmation from the Ashwood estate. The date was right there in black and white. June 14th. Contract signed. Deposit paid. I checked the date on the email. August 23rd. Nearly 3 months ago. Then I did something I almost never did. I opened Instagram and navigated to Vanessa's profile. My sister posted constantly, a carefully curated feed of her perfect life. Engagement photos. Outfit inspiration. Motivational quotes overlaid on sunset backgrounds. I scrolled down, my heart pounding harder with each swipe. And there it was. Posted just 2 days ago. A photo of Vanessa and Tyler standing in front of a rustic barn, string lights glowing softly in the background. The caption read, "Found our dream venue. June can't come soon enough." The photo was geotagged. The Ashwood Estate. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. She hadn't just found a venue. She'd taken mine. And she'd posted about it publicly, like it was fate, like it was destiny, like she hadn't just reached into my life and ripped out something I'd worked so hard to build. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My first instinct was to call her. To scream. To demand an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down on the cold tile floor of my kitchen, pulled my knees to my chest, and let the tears come. Not because I was heartbroken. But because I finally understood. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a choice. Vanessa had chosen to take something that was mine, and my parents, wherever they were in all of this, had let her. Marcus found me there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the floor, my phone clutched in my hand. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat down next to me, wrapped his arms around me, and held on. When I finally told him, his face went hard in a way I'd rarely seen. Marcus was gentle, patient, the kind of man who gave people the benefit of the doubt. But this he couldn't excuse. "We're calling them," he said, his voice low and firm. "We're calling the venue, your parents, and Vanessa. This isn't right." But I shook my head. "It won't matter. They'll spin it. They'll make it sound reasonable. They'll say I'm overreacting. Then what do you want to do?" I looked up at him, my eyes still wet but my resolve hardening like steel cooling in water. "I want to stop playing their game." The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but beneath it was something sharper. Something that felt almost like purpose. I grabbed my laptop and opened a new browser tab. I didn't have a plan yet, not a full one, but I knew where to start. I searched for wedding venues in Sterling Hills and the surrounding areas. I scrolled past the usual suspects, the country clubs and hotel ballrooms. Then I saw it. St. Augustine Cathedral. The photo on the website took my breath away. Vaulted ceilings. Stained glass windows that caught the light and threw rainbows across the stone floors. Rows of wooden pews polished to a deep, rich shine. It was grand. It was historic. It was breathtaking. And it was the one place Vanessa had talked about since we were kids. I remembered her dragging me there once when we were teenagers, making me stand in the empty sanctuary while she spun in circles, imagining herself walking down the aisle in a white gown. She'd even cried a little, saying it was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. That someday, when she got married, it would be there or nowhere. I clicked on the booking inquiry form and filled it out slowly, carefully. Name. Date. Contact information. When I hit submit, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the quiet satisfaction of taking back control. The cathedral's office called me back within 2 days. Father Gregory, the parish priest, had a voice like warm honey, gentle and unhurried. He told me they had availability in late May, just 2 weeks before my original date at the Ashwood estate. The timing felt almost cosmic. He invited Marcus and me to come see the space in person, and we scheduled a visit for that Saturday. Walking into St. Augustine Cathedral for the first time as an adult felt different than I remembered. The last time I'd been here was with Vanessa, watching her twirl and dream. Now I was the one standing at the entrance, my hand tucked into Marcus's, looking down that long center aisle toward the altar. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass, painting the floor in blues and golds and deep crimsons. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, weighted with history and reverence and something that felt almost sacred. Father Gregory met us near the front pews, his white collar crisp against his black shirt. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He walked us through the space, explaining the acoustics, the capacity, the guidelines for decorations. Marcus asked practical questions about parking and timing. I mostly just listened, letting the beauty of the place wash over me. This cathedral has seen generations of families, Father Gregory said as we stood near the altar, looking back toward the entrance. Baptisms, weddings, funerals. It holds stories in these walls. When couples marry here, they become part of that legacy. I felt something catch in my throat. Legacy. Story. It sounded so much bigger than what I'd planned at the Ashwood estate. This wasn't just a venue. It was a statement. A declaration. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew Vanessa would hear about it. She'd know. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care about softening the blow. We'd like to book it, I said, my voice steady. May 28th, if it's available. Father Gregory smiled. It is. Let's make it official. We signed the paperwork in his small office, surrounded by shelves of old theological texts and framed photos of past parish events. The deposit was more than the Ashwood estate, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He wrote the check with a flourish, then looked at me with a grin that said he knew exactly what this meant. When we left, the sky had turned a soft lavender, the kind of dusk that makes everything feel possible. I didn't tell my parents right away. I didn't call Vanessa. I just sat with it, letting the decision settle into my bones like a truth I'd finally allowed myself to speak. The memory hit me 2 days later while I was folding laundry in my apartment. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe it was the rhythmic motion of matching socks, the mindless task that let my brain wander. Suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting on the bleachers at Vanessa's dance recital. She was on stage in a sparkly blue costume, spinning and leaping while the audience clapped. I remember my parents sitting a few rows ahead of me, Dad with his camera, Mom leaning forward with her hands clasped like she was watching a miracle unfold. I'd had a piano recital the same day. Earlier in the afternoon, at a different venue across town. I'd played a Chopin nocturne I'd practiced for months, my fingers trembling but hitting every note. There had been maybe 20 people in the audience, mostly other parents waiting for their own kids to perform. My parents weren't there. They'd sent Aunt Diane instead, who clapped enthusiastically and bought me ice cream afterward. But it wasn't the same. When I asked Mom about it later, she'd given me a sad smile and said, "Sweetheart, Vanessa's recital was the big spring showcase. You understand, right? We'll catch your next one." They never did. I dropped the sock I was holding, my hands suddenly cold. How many times had that happened? How many moments had I swallowed down, convinced myself it didn't matter, that I was being too sensitive, that they were just busy, just distracted, just focused on Vanessa because she needed it more. I thought about my high school graduation, where I'd given the salutatorian speech. Vanessa had a cheerleading competition the same weekend, 3 hours away. Guess which event my parents attended? I thought about the time I got accepted into a prestigious summer writing program and came home bursting with excitement, only to find the house full of people celebrating Vanessa's acceptance to a state university. A state university. Not even a competitive school. But she was going to college, and that was worth a party. My writing program got a "that's nice, honey," and a reminder not to track mud through the kitchen. The patterns were everywhere once I started looking. Birthday parties where my cake was store-bought while Vanessa's was custom-designed. Christmas mornings where her pile of gifts dwarfed mine. Family photos where I was always slightly out of frame, or caught mid-blink, while Vanessa was perfectly centered and radiant. It wasn't abuse. It was something quieter. Something harder to name. It was being tolerated instead of celebrated. Included but never prioritized. Loved, maybe, but never chosen. Marcus came home to find me sitting on the couch, surrounded by unfolded laundry, staring at nothing. He sat down beside me without a word, just pressed his shoulder against mine and waited. "I don't think they ever really saw me," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not the way they see her." He didn't try to argue. Didn't offer empty reassurances. He just took my hand and held it. That night, I called Aunt Diane. She was my mother's younger sister, the one who'd always been on the periphery of family events, observing but rarely participating in the dynamics. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and familiar. "Natalie. I was just thinking about you. How's the wedding planning going?" I hesitated, then decided to just say it. "Vanessa stole my venue." There was a long pause. Then, softly, "Tell me everything." I did. I told her about the Ashwood estate, about the phone call, about Vanessa's Instagram post. I told her about the cathedral, about booking it before Vanessa could, about the small, fierce satisfaction I felt in taking something she'd always wanted. When I finished, Aunt Diane was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said finally, her voice firm. "It's about time you stopped letting them walk all over you. You don't think I'm being petty?" "Petty?" She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Natalie, I've watched your mother fawn over Vanessa for 28 years while you stood in the corner being the good daughter who never made waves. You could light the house on fire at this point and I'd call it justified." I smiled despite myself. "That seems extreme." "Maybe. But you know what I mean. You've always been the one expected to understand, to compromise, to step aside so Vanessa could have her moment. Well, this is your moment. Take it. And don't you dare feel guilty about it." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. Permission. Validation. The two things I'd been craving from my parents and never received. Hearing them from Aunt Diane didn't fix everything, but it helped. It reminded me I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being unreasonable. I was simply done being invisible. The weeks passed in a strange blur. I threw myself into wedding planning with Kevin Tan, who turned out to be the coordinator for the cathedral as well. He'd transitioned from the Ashwood estate to freelance work, and when I mentioned my situation, his face had gone carefully neutral. "I heard about the double booking," he said carefully. "For what it's worth, those don't usually happen by accident." I didn't press him for details. I didn't need confirmation of what I already knew. Instead, I focused on making every detail of this wedding perfect. Not to prove anything to Vanessa. Not even to prove anything to my parents. But to prove something to myself. That I could create something beautiful. That I deserved to take up space. That my happiness mattered just as much as anyone else's. Marcus and I picked flowers, soft blush roses and white peonies with trailing greenery. We tasted cakes and settled on a simple vanilla bean with raspberry filling. We chose readings and music, including a string quartet that would play Pachelbel's canon as I walked down the aisle. Every decision felt intentional, weighted with meaning. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a reclamation. I didn't tell my parents about the venue change. Not yet. Let them think I was scrambling to find a replacement for the Ashwood estate. Let them assume I was stressed and struggling. The truth would come out eventually, but for now, I wanted to hold it close. A secret that was mine alone. Vanessa posted regularly about her wedding planning. Photos of dress fittings, cake tastings, floral mock-ups. She tagged the Ashwood estate in every post, gushing about how perfect it was, how she couldn't imagine getting married anywhere else. The comments poured in, hundreds of congratulations and heart emojis. I stopped looking after a while. It was easier that way. Then, on a cold February evening, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But something, maybe habit, maybe curiosity, made me pick up. Natalie, sweetheart, I wanted to check in. How are you holding up with the venue situation? I know that must have been disappointing. Her voice was syrupy, concerned in that performative way that made my skin crawl. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, staring at the calendar on my fridge where I'd circled May 28th in red ink. I'm fine, Mom. We found a new venue. Oh, that's wonderful. Where? I paused, savoring the moment. St. Augustine Cathedral. Silence. Complete, utter silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the realization dawning. The cathedral, she said finally, her voice tight. That's Vanessa's dream venue. Is it? I hadn't realized. Natalie. Her tone shifted, taking on that edge I knew so well. The one that said I was being difficult, unreasonable, selfish. You know how much that place means to her. She's talked about it since she was a child. And I'm getting married there in May. 3 weeks before her wedding. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was sharp. This is incredibly hurtful. You're doing this to spite her. I'm doing this because it's a beautiful venue and it was available. If Vanessa wanted it so badly, she should have booked it herself. She was planning to. She just wanted to wait until after she secured her date at the Ashwood estate. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Well, now she has the Ashwood estate. Problem solved. Natalie Marie Brooks, this is not how we raised you. And there it was. The guilt. The expectation. The implication that I was the one being unreasonable, that I was the problem, that I should step aside gracefully so Vanessa could have what she wanted. Again. You're right, Mom. You raised me to be quiet and accommodating and invisible. But I'm done with that. I'm getting married at St. Augustine Cathedral on May 28th, and you're welcome to attend or not. That's your choice. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'd never spoken to my mother like that. Never stood my ground so firmly. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Marcus came into the kitchen, having overheard the tail end of the conversation. He didn't say anything. Just pulled me into a hug, his arms solid and reassuring around me. You okay? He murmured into my hair. I think so, I said. And surprisingly, I meant it. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed relentlessly for the next hour. Texts from my mother, then my father, then finally Vanessa herself. I ignored them all, letting the notifications pile up like snow against a door I had no intention of opening. Finally, when the buzzing stopped, I opened the messages. Mom's texts were a mix of disappointment and manipulation. How could you do this to your sister? After everything we've done for you. This is so selfish. Dad's were shorter, more direct. Call your mother. Work this out. Be reasonable. Vanessa's were the most predictable. A long paragraph about how hurt she was, how betrayed she felt, how she couldn't believe I would stoop so low. She accused me of jealousy, of pettiness, of trying to ruin her special day. She ended with, I guess I never really knew you at all. I read them all twice, then set my phone down and didn't respond. There was nothing to say. No explanation that would satisfy them. No apology that would fix this. Because I wasn't sorry. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, and I refused to feel guilty about it. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Heavy cardstock, cream-colored with gold embossing. Vanessa's engagement party at the Willowbrook Country Club. Black tie optional. I stood in my apartment entryway, turning the envelope over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Marcus came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. Are you going to go? He asked carefully. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash and pretend it never arrived. But another part, the part that had spent weeks sitting with anger and hurt and finally, clarity, knew I needed to see this through. Not for them. For me. To prove to myself that I could walk into that room and not crumble under the weight of their expectations. Yes, I said finally. I'm going. The country club was exactly what I expected. Chandeliers dripping crystal, white tablecloths so crisp they looked starched into submission, and enough floral arrangements to stock a funeral home. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, and kept my jewelry minimal. Marcus wore a suit that made him look unfairly handsome, and when we walked in together, I felt his hand at the small of my back, steadying me. The room was already full. Extended family, Vanessa's friends, people I vaguely recognized from childhood but hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone looked polished, expensive, like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. I spotted my parents near the bar, my mother in a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my rent. She saw me and her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, lifting her champagne glass in a gesture that could have been a greeting or a dismissal. Vanessa was holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by a cluster of women who hung on her every word. She wore white, of course, a fitted cocktail dress that showed off her figure and made her look bridal without technically being a wedding gown. Tyler stood beside her, handsome in that generic way that suggested he'd been chosen more for aesthetics than substance. When Vanessa's eyes met mine across the room, her smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her gaze. I didn't approach her. I found a table near the back and sat down, Marcus beside me, and watched the performance unfold. Because that's what it was. A performance. Vanessa laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Tyler placing his hand on her lower back with mechanical precision. My parents beaming like they were accepting an award on her behalf. It was all so carefully choreographed, so meticulously staged, that it felt less like a celebration and more like a presentation. The speeches started after dinner. Tyler's best man went first, telling stories about college parties and road trips that made Tyler sound like every other fraternity brother who'd ever lived. Then Vanessa's maid of honor, a woman named Becca who I vaguely remembered from high school, stood up with a microphone and launched into a tearful monologue about true love and destiny and how Vanessa deserved all the happiness in the world. My mother went next. She stood with the grace of someone used to public speaking, her voice warm and theatrical. She talked about watching Vanessa grow up, about how she'd always known her daughter was destined for something special. She mentioned the wedding, the venue, the dream coming true. She didn't mention me once. I felt Marcus shift beside me, his hand finding mine under the table. I squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. The applause was thunderous when my mother finished, and Vanessa stood to embrace her, both of them glowing under the soft lighting. It was a moment designed for photographs, and sure enough, a dozen phones appeared, capturing the image for social media posterity. Then Vanessa took the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming, for celebrating this journey with her and Tyler. She talked about how blessed she felt, how supported, how loved. She mentioned the venue again, the Ashwood estate, and how it was everything she'd ever dreamed of. Her voice caught slightly, a calculated emotion that made several people in the audience murmur sympathetically. I know not everyone gets their dream venue, she said, her eyes flicking toward me so briefly I almost missed it. But I'm so grateful that everything worked out the way it was supposed to. Like it was meant to be. The implication hung in the air. I felt heat rise in my chest, not from embarrassment but from anger. She was rewriting history in real time, turning her theft into fate, her betrayal into destiny. And everyone was buying it. When the speeches ended, people stood and mingled. I stayed seated, nursing a glass of wine I'd barely touched. Aunt Diane appeared beside me, seemingly out of nowhere, and slid into the empty chair on my other side. "This is nauseating," she said under her breath, not bothering with pleasantries. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "You have no idea." "Oh, I have some idea. I've been watching your mother preen for the last hour like Vanessa just cured cancer. Meanwhile, you're sitting here like a ghost at your own family's event." "I'm fine," I said, but it sounded hollow even to me. Aunt Diane gave me a look. "You don't have to be fine. You're allowed to be angry." "I am angry," I admitted quietly. "But I'm also tired." tired of fighting for space in a room that was never going to make room for me anyway. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Then stop fighting. Just leave. Walk out of here and don't look back. They don't deserve your presence. I considered it. Leaving would be easy. Satisfying, even. But something kept me rooted to my chair. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the need to witness this fully, to let the reality of who they were sink in completely so I'd never doubt my decision to distance myself. Vanessa eventually made her way over to our table. She moved through the crowd like a politician, stopping to hug and laugh and pose for photos. When she reached me, her smile was wide but her eyes were sharp. "Natalie. I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Wouldn't miss it," I said evenly. She glanced at Marcus, then back at me. "And congratulations on finding a new venue. The cathedral, right? That's a big space. Are you sure you'll have enough guests to fill it?" The dig was subtle but clear. I kept my expression neutral. "We'll manage." "I'm sure you will. It's just, cathedrals can feel so empty if they're not packed. But I guess it's better than nothing, right? After what happened with the Ashwood estate." Aunt Diane stiffened beside me. Marcus's hand tightened around mine. I met Vanessa's gaze and held it. "The cathedral is beautiful," I said calmly. "In fact, I think it's the most stunning venue in the area. I'm really grateful it was available." Vanessa's smile tightened just slightly. "Well, I hope it works out for you." "Really, I do." She walked away before I could respond, rejoining her circle of admirers. Aunt Diane let out a low whistle. "That woman is a piece of work." "She always has been," I said quietly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I stayed long enough to avoid giving my parents ammunition to call me rude or bitter. When Marcus and I finally left, the cool night air felt like a release. I stood on the steps of the country club, breathing deeply, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "You okay?" Marcus asked for what felt like the 100th time that night. "Yeah," I said, and this time I meant it. "I think I am." The next morning, I woke up to a series of missed calls and texts. All from my mother. I ignored them while I made coffee, letting the familiar ritual ground me. When I finally listened to the voicemail, her voice was clipped and cold. "Natalie, we need to talk about your behavior last night. Several people commented on how uncomfortable you looked, and it reflected poorly on the whole family. I think it would be best if you reached out to Vanessa and cleared the air. This tension is unnecessary and frankly, embarrassing. Call me back." I deleted the message without responding. Then I opened my wedding planning binder and flipped to the guest list. My parents' names were at the top, written in careful script. I stared at them for a long moment, pen hovering over the paper. Then I drew a single line through both names. Not angrily. Not with flourish. Just a clean, decisive strike. Marcus came into the living room, coffee in hand, and saw what I'd done. He didn't say anything, just set his mug down and pulled me into a hug. I let myself lean into him, feeling the weight of the decision settle. "You sure?" he asked softly. "I'm sure." The days that followed brought a strange sense of peace. I stopped checking Vanessa's social media. Stopped waiting for my parents to call with an apology that would never come. I focused on the wedding, on building something that felt authentically ours. Kevin helped me design centerpieces that incorporated books, a nod to how Marcus and I had met in a bookstore. We chose readings from poets we loved. We wrote our own vows, sitting across from each other at my tiny kitchen table, laughing and crying as we tried to put into words what we meant to each other. Izzy, my best friend since college, came over one afternoon to help me address invitations. She'd been my sounding board through all of this, listening to hours of venting and frustration without judgment. As we worked, she brought up what I'd been avoiding. "Have you heard anything from your family?" I shook my head. Radio silence. "Which is fine. Better, actually. And you're really not inviting them? No. I'm not. She nodded slowly, sealing an envelope. Good. They don't deserve to be there. Part of me feels guilty, I admitted. Like I'm supposed to rise above it, be the bigger person, all that. Screw that, Izzy said bluntly. Being the bigger person is just code for letting people treat you like garbage while you smile and take it. You don't owe them anything. Her words echoed what Aunt Diane had said. What Marcus had implied without saying directly. What I was slowly learning to believe myself. I didn't owe my family access to my joy just because we shared DNA. Love wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, seeing someone, choosing them. And they had never chosen me. 3 weeks before the wedding, something shifted. I was at work, teaching a class on creative writing to high schoolers, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it during class, but when I checked afterward, there was a voicemail from a woman named Helen who introduced herself as a reporter for a local lifestyle blog. Hi Natalie, I'm working on a piece about wedding trends in the Sterling Hills area, and I came across your booking at St. Augustine Cathedral. I'd love to feature your wedding as part of the article. If you're interested, please give me a call back. I stared at the message, confused. How had she even found out about my wedding? The cathedral wasn't public information. Unless someone had tipped her off. I called Kevin immediately. Did you mention my wedding to any press? I asked when he picked up. No, why? I explained the voicemail. Kevin was quiet for a moment. That's odd. But honestly, Natalie, St. Augustine is a high-profile venue. It's possible they reached out to the cathedral for a list of upcoming events and got your name that way. It happens sometimes. It made sense, but something about it felt off. I called the reporter back and politely declined. I didn't want my wedding turned into content, especially not when I knew Vanessa would inevitably see it and find a way to make it about her. But the seed had been planted. Someone, somewhere, was paying attention to what I was doing. And whether it was coincidence or something more deliberate, it made me hyper-aware of how public this was all becoming. 2 weeks before the wedding, the dam broke. I was grocery shopping when Vanessa's name flashed across my phone. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want, Vanessa? Wow, okay, hostile much? Her voice was sharp, wounded. I'm calling because I heard something that I really hope isn't true. And what's that? That you uninvited Mom and Dad to your wedding. I paused in the middle of the cereal aisle, my cart half full. I didn't uninvite them. I just didn't invite them in the first place. Are you serious right now? Her voice pitched higher, disbelief mixing with outrage. They're our parents, Natalie. You can't just exclude them from your wedding. I can, actually. It's my wedding. This is insane. You're being completely unreasonable. All because of some stupid venue mix-up. It wasn't a mix-up, Vanessa. You stole my venue. And you know it. I didn't steal anything. The venue made a mistake, and I happened to benefit. That's not my fault. I almost laughed. Almost. You booked the exact venue I had reserved, on the exact date I had planned, and you're telling me that's a coincidence? Yes. God, Natalie, not everything is about you. Maybe you should consider that the universe wanted me to have that venue. Maybe it was meant to be mine all along. There it was again. Destiny. Fate. The convenient narrative that absolved her of any responsibility. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Believe whatever you want, Vanessa. But I'm getting married at St. Augustine Cathedral, and Mom and Dad aren't invited. Neither are you. You're being cruel. No, I said quietly. I'm being honest. And I'm done pretending this family ever made space for me. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking as I pushed my cart forward, abandoning it halfway down the aisle. I walked out of the store, got in my car, and sat in the parking lot, breathing hard. It felt like I'd just run a marathon. Exhausting. Painful. But also liberating. That night, my father called. His voice was calm, measured, the tone he used when he was trying to be reasonable but was actually deeply angry. "Natalie, your mother is very upset. This situation with the wedding has gotten out of hand." "I'm not changing my mind, Dad. I'm not asking you to change your mind. I'm asking you to think about what you're doing. You're creating a rift in this family that might not heal." "The rift was already there," I said. "I'm just finally acknowledging it." "That's not fair. We've always supported you." "Have you?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "When was the last time you came to something that mattered to me? When was the last time you chose me over Vanessa?" Silence. Long and heavy. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. "I think you're being selfish. And I think you're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But it's my choice to make." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, feeling the finality of it settle over me like snow. There was no going back from this. No reconciliation that would erase what had been said. And strangely, I was okay with that. The morning of Vanessa's supposed wedding arrived with unseasonably cold rain. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by my window watching the water streak down the glass. According to the original plan, Vanessa should have been getting ready right now at the Ashwood estate, surrounded by bridesmaids and champagne and the careful chaos of wedding day preparation. Instead, my phone had been buzzing since dawn with texts from extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. The messages were variations on the same theme. "Did you hear? Vanessa postponed. Something about permits. The wedding's been moved to July. Are you still getting married in 2 weeks?" I didn't respond to any of them. I just sipped my coffee and watched the rain and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction but wasn't quite sympathy either. More like vindication. Vanessa had been so certain that everything would fall into place for her, that the universe would bend to accommodate her desires. And now she was scrambling. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, hair disheveled, and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I really am." "Did you see the texts?" "I saw them." He rested his chin on my shoulder. "Do you think she postponed because of you?" I considered that. Part of me wanted to believe that my wedding at the cathedral had thrown her off, forced her to reconsider her timeline. But more likely, it was something practical. Permit issues were common at outdoor venues. Or maybe Tyler's family had scheduling conflicts. Or maybe, just maybe, the pressure of competing with my cathedral wedding had made her second-guess the Ashwood estate. "I don't know," I said honestly. "And I don't really care." The truth was, I'd stopped measuring my choices against Vanessa's reactions. For so long, my entire existence had been calibrated around not making waves, not overshadowing her, not taking up too much space. But something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't living in reaction to her anymore. I was just living. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final preparations. Dress fittings, rehearsal dinner planning, last-minute vendor confirmations. Izzy threw me a small bachelorette party, just a handful of close friends having dinner and drinks at a wine bar downtown. No strippers, no matching t-shirts, no social media documentation. Just laughter and honest conversation and the kind of uncomplicated joy I'd been missing for years. At one point during the evening, Izzy raised her glass. To Natalie, who finally stopped apologizing for existing. Everyone cheered. I felt my eyes sting with unexpected tears. It was such a simple statement, but it landed with the force of truth. I had spent my entire life apologizing. Sorry for taking up space. Sorry for having needs. Sorry for not being Vanessa. And now, finally, I was done. 3 days before the wedding, Kevin called with news. "So, I just got a very interesting phone call." "From who?" "From a woman claiming to be your sister. She wanted to know if there were any openings at the cathedral for late July. My stomach dropped. What did you tell her? I told her I'd check and get back to her. But Natalie, here's the thing. St. Augustine doesn't just book anyone. It's a Catholic church. You need to be a registered parishioner or have a direct family connection to the parish. She doesn't qualify. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by something darker. Anger. Because of course Vanessa would try this. Of course she'd attempt to book the same venue, to steal this too, to make even my rebellion about her. Don't call her back, I said. Just let it drop. You sure? Positive. That evening, I received an email. The subject line read, "We need to talk." It was from my mother. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. The message was brief, clinical. Natalie, I understand you're upset about the venue situation. But what you're doing now, excluding your family from your wedding, using the cathedral as some kind of statement, it's hurtful and unnecessary. Vanessa is devastated. Your father and I are heartbroken. I'm asking you, one last time, to reconsider. Family is forever. This grudge won't serve you. Love, Mom. I read it twice, parsing every word for sincerity and finding none. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an attempt at understanding. It was a demand dressed up as a plea. Family is forever, but only when I played by their rules. Only when I made myself small enough to fit into the role they'd assigned me. I closed the laptop without responding and went to bed. The day before the wedding, Aunt Diane arrived from out of state. She was staying at a hotel near the cathedral, and I met her for lunch at a small cafe we used to visit when I was younger. She looked the same as always, stylish but understated, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So," she said, settling into her chair with a cup of tea. "Tomorrow's the big day. How are you feeling?" "Nervous. Excited. Relieved." "Relieved? That I made it here. That I didn't let them talk me out of it." She nodded knowingly. "Your mother's been calling me, you know. Trying to convince me to convince you to invite them. And I told her that if she wanted an invitation, she should have acted like a mother who deserved one." Aunt Diane took a sip of tea, unbothered. "She didn't like that." I smiled despite myself. "I can imagine. Natalie, I want you to know something." She set her cup down and looked at me directly. "What you're doing, setting boundaries, choosing yourself, it's one of the hardest things a person can do. Especially when the people demanding access are family. But you're doing the right thing. And I'm proud of you." The words hit me harder than I expected. Proud. When was the last time someone in my family had said that to me? I couldn't remember. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll enjoy tomorrow. Don't spend your wedding day worrying about who's not there. Focus on who is." I promised. That night, Marcus and I stayed in separate hotels, honoring the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. Izzy stayed with me, and we ordered room service and watched terrible romantic comedies until we fell asleep. It felt easy, comfortable, like the calm before something beautiful rather than something terrifying. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The rain from weeks earlier had passed, leaving behind crisp air and a sky so blue it looked painted. I woke up feeling surprisingly calm. No cold feet. No second thoughts. Just a quiet certainty that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Izzy helped me into my dress, a simple ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt. Nothing over the top. Nothing designed to compete or impress. Just something that felt like me. She fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck, the one my mother had never offered but Aunt Diane had quietly passed to me months ago. "You look beautiful," Izzy said, her eyes shining. "I feel beautiful," I said, and meant it. We arrived at the cathedral an hour before the ceremony. The space was already transforming. Flowers adorned the ends of each pew, soft pink and white blooms that caught the light streaming through the stained glass. The string quartet was setting up near the altar, tuning their instruments. Kevin was everywhere at once, coordinating with vendors and checking details with the efficiency of a military general. I stood in the bride's room, a small side chapel with a mirror and comfortable chairs, and took a moment to just breathe. Through the doorway, I could hear guests beginning to arrive. Voices echoing in the high-ceilinged space. Footsteps on stone. The quiet rustle of programs being distributed. Aunt Diane appeared in the doorway, stunning in a deep emerald dress. She took one look at me and pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh, sweetheart. You're radiant." I hugged her carefully, mindful of my dress and makeup. "Thank you for being here. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away." She handed me something small and wrapped in tissue paper. I opened it carefully. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny book. "For strength," she said. "And for remembering that you write your own story." I slipped it onto my wrist, the weight of it comforting. A reminder. A talisman. Kevin appeared, headset on, clipboard in hand. "We're about 15 minutes out. Marcus is at the altar. The quartet is ready. How are you feeling?" "Ready," I said. And I was. The processional music began, the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon filling the cathedral with sound so pure it made my chest ache. Izzy went first, walking down the aisle with measured steps. Then it was my turn. Aunt Diane linked her arm through mine. I'd asked her to walk me down the aisle, and she'd cried when I did. Now she squeezed my hand gently. "Let's do this," she whispered. The doors opened, and the full majesty of St. Augustine Cathedral spread before me. Rows of guests turning to look, their faces warm with genuine joy. The stained glass casting colored light across everything, blues and golds and deep reds. The string quartet playing with perfect precision. And at the end of that long aisle, standing at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, was Marcus. His face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and I felt my own face mirror his. I didn't look at the empty seats where my parents should have been. I didn't scan the crowd for Vanessa's face, half expecting her to show up and cause a scene. I just looked at Marcus and walked toward him, each step feeling like a choice, a declaration, a promise to myself as much as to him. When I reached the altar, Aunt Diane placed my hand in Marcus's and kissed my cheek. "Be happy," she whispered. Father Gregory began the ceremony with words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. I barely heard them. I was too focused on Marcus, on the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world, on the way his thumb traced gentle circles on my hand. When it came time for vows, I pulled out the folded paper I'd kept in my small bouquet. My hands didn't shake as I read. "Marcus, when I met you, I was someone who apologized for taking up space. Who made myself smaller so others could feel bigger. Who believed that love was something you earned by being perfect and quiet and convenient. You showed me that love isn't about shrinking. It's about expanding. Growing. Becoming more fully yourself because someone sees you and chooses you exactly as you are. You chose me. Every single day, you choose me. And today, I choose you back. I choose us. I choose this life we're building together. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. And because you taught me that I deserve to be chosen." My voice cracked on the last sentence, but I didn't care. Marcus was crying, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. When he read his vows, his voice was steady but thick with emotion. "Natalie, you are the strongest person I know. Not because you never break, but because you keep choosing to stand back up. You've faced down family expectations and unfair comparisons and a lifetime of being overlooked, and you're still here. Still kind. Still believing in good things. I don't just love you. I admire you. I respect you. And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you are seen, valued, and cherished. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. And I am so grateful I get to stand beside you. Father Gregory led us through the exchange of rings, the simple gold bands we'd chosen together. When he pronounced us married and Marcus kissed me, the cathedral erupted in applause. The sound echoed off the stone walls, magnified and glorious. We walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, past rows of people who genuinely loved us. At the door, I glanced back once at the cathedral, at the space I'd claimed for myself, and felt something settle deep in my chest. Peace. The reception was held at a historic inn nearby, a cozy space with exposed brick and warm lighting. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. Just good food, good wine, and people who actually wanted to celebrate us. Aunt Diane gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. Izzy told embarrassing stories from college that made Marcus blush. His best man talked about how Marcus had changed after meeting me, become happier, more settled, more himself. We danced. We ate. We laughed until our faces hurt. And not once did I think about the people who weren't there. Because the people who were there, they were enough. More than enough. Late in the evening, as Marcus and I swayed together during a slow song, he leaned down and whispered in my ear. No regrets? I looked up at him, at his kind face and warm eyes, and shook my head. Not a single one. And I meant it. This wedding, this day, this choice, it wasn't about revenge or proving a point or getting back at anyone. It was about finally understanding that I deserved to take up space. That my happiness mattered. That I didn't need permission or approval from people who had never truly seen me. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, Aunt Diane pulled me aside one last time. I have to tell you something. What? Your mother called me this afternoon. She wanted to know if I'd take pictures of the wedding for her. My stomach tightened. What did you say? I told her that if she wanted to see her daughter's wedding, she should have acted like she wanted to be there. Aunt Diane smiled grimly. Then I hung up on her. I should have felt guilty. Should have felt that familiar tug of obligation. But I didn't. I just felt tired. Tired of carrying the weight of their expectations. Tired of making excuses for their choices. Thank you, I said quietly. Don't thank me. Just be happy. That's the best revenge there is. Marcus and I left the reception around midnight, driving through empty streets toward the small bed and breakfast where we'd spend our wedding night. Tomorrow we'd fly to Portugal for our honeymoon, 2 weeks of exploring coastal towns and eating too much seafood and forgetting about family drama entirely. But tonight, as we pulled up to the inn and Marcus carried me over the threshold in a gesture that was both silly and sweet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete. Whole. Like I'd finally found the place where I belonged. Not in a building or a city or even with my family. But with myself. And with someone who chose to stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me, but right there. Side by side. Portugal was everything we needed it to be. 2 weeks of cobblestone streets and ocean views and meals that stretched for hours. We didn't check social media. Didn't answer calls from unknown numbers. Just existed in a bubble of newlywed bliss that felt earned rather than given. When we returned home, reality was waiting. A stack of mail on the kitchen counter. Voicemails we'd ignored. And a single envelope, hand-delivered according to the note from our building manager, that bore my mother's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Marcus stood beside me, close enough to support but not hovering. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery and a check. The letter was brief, my mother's handwriting as elegant as ever. Natalie, enclosed is a gift for your wedding. We hope you'll accept it as a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps when things settle, we can all sit down and talk. There's been enough distance. Let's find our way back to family. The check was for $5,000. Generous by any standard. And completely missing the point. I looked at Marcus, who'd read over my shoulder. What do you want to do? He asked. I walked to my desk, pulled out a blank piece of paper, and wrote 3 sentences. Thank you for the gesture, but I can't accept this. Money doesn't fix what's broken between us. If you want to repair our relationship, it starts with acknowledging what happened, not trying to buy your way past it. I tucked the check back into the envelope with my note and mailed it the next day. My mother never responded. Life moved forward. Marcus and I settled into married life with surprising ease. Work continued. Friendships deepened. We hosted dinners at our apartment and took weekend trips and talked about maybe buying a house in a year or 2. Normal life. Quiet life. The kind of contentment that doesn't make for dramatic stories but feels like wealth anyway. 3 months after the wedding, Vanessa got married at the Ashwood estate. I know because extended family members posted photos. She looked beautiful, of course. The venue was lovely. Everything appeared perfect from the outside. I felt nothing looking at the pictures. No jealousy. No vindication. Just mild curiosity, the way you might feel seeing an acquaintance's vacation photos. Aunt Diane called me the day after Vanessa's wedding. Your mother cried through the entire ceremony. Why are you telling me this? Because I think she finally realized what she lost. Who she lost. I watched her scanning the crowd like she was looking for someone. You, probably. Or maybe just the daughter she could have had if she'd bothered to see you. That's not my responsibility to fix, I said gently. I know. I just thought you should know that consequences are landing, even if they're landing slowly. Winter came. Then spring again. A full year passed since I'd bought my wedding dress, since I'd stood in that cathedral and chosen myself. Life had a rhythm now, steady and sure. Marcus got a promotion. I started writing again, something I'd abandoned years ago under the weight of feeling unseen. Small essays at first, then a blog that people actually read. Words about family and boundaries and learning to prioritize your own peace. One afternoon in May, almost exactly a year after our wedding, I received a message request on social media. From Vanessa. I almost deleted it without reading. But something made me click. Natalie, I know we haven't spoken. I know I messed up. Tyler and I are expecting a baby, and it's made me think about family differently. About what kind of mother I want to be. I don't want to repeat patterns. I was hoping maybe we could talk. Just coffee. No parents. No drama. Just us. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the boundary I'd worked so hard to establish. But another part, smaller but insistent, wondered if people could actually change. If Vanessa was genuinely reaching out or if this was another manipulation. I showed Marcus the message. What's your gut telling you? He asked. That I don't owe her anything. But also that maybe I'm curious. Then be curious. But protect yourself too. I responded simply. Congratulations on the baby. I'm willing to meet, but I need you to know that I'm not interested in going back to how things were. If we rebuild anything, it starts from scratch with honesty. She agreed to meet the following week at a neutral cafe. When I arrived, she was already there, looking different somehow. Softer. Tired in a way that seemed genuine rather than performed. We ordered coffee and sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence. Thank you for coming, she said finally. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I've been thinking a lot about the venue thing. About how I handled it. I told myself it was just bad luck, that it wasn't my fault. But I knew. I knew that venue was yours, and I took it anyway because I always took things from you. Because I could. The admission hung between us. No excuses. No justifications. Just truth. Why? I asked. Because Mom and Dad made it easy. They always chose me, always prioritized my needs, and I got used to it. I got entitled. And I never stopped to think about what that did to you. She looked up, meeting my eyes. I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I finally see it. I finally see what I did. I sat with that for a moment. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase years of hurt. But it was something. A beginning, maybe. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But Vanessa, I need you to understand something. I'm not going back to being the person who steps aside so you can have what you want. I can't. That version of me doesn't exist anymore. I know. And I don't want you to. I want to know the person you actually are. If you'll let me. We talked for 2 hours. Honestly. Uncomfortably. About childhood and patterns and the ways our parents had shaped us both, just differently. It wasn't reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. Testing whether there was anything worth salvaging. When we parted, I didn't feel healed. But I felt heard. And that was something. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.